Say, hey everybody, how is it going? What we're actually here to talk about is GorillaCam. So we're going to let people kind of come into the room, but I've got a chat off here to the side because I have to keep this screen full screened, otherwise you won't see Chad. So yeah, we're going to let some people show up, but it's super cool having everybody here in the room. What's going on, everybody? We've got some beta testers in the room. We've got a dead mouse in the room. I don't know if it's the for realsies one, but if it is, that's amazing. But Chad's got some cool demo scenes to show off. I've got things we can talk about. We can get super technical on the way it's actually built and the way it actually works. Chad is obviously this is originally his brainchild, trying to get this all figured out. But he's got all these really cool, sexy scenes to show off the different elements of it. So that's going to be super fun. And Dead Mouse is saying that, yeah, it is actually Dead Mouse. So it was really cool getting to see that one show with you when you're out in Chicago, Joel. It was super cool.
That's
I'm
really
super excited that you're here.
that's crazy. Hey, what's up, man?
I just assumed that somebody in there trolling us, but that's doubly cool. Well, why don't we get right to it? We'll be covering a whole bunch of different things, so why waste any time? So Chad came up with a really cool idea to make better looking cameras of Cinema 4D. That right now everything feels really lifeless and dead. And the concept he originally came to me with was like a fast, medium, slow concept. It's the idea of the camera can rotate around very slowly, so kind of a slow waving movement. And then you go and you layer up a medium speed one, so then you have your camera shaking at a smaller amount but faster, and then a very tiny but fast one jittering around. And the magic comes in when you layer up...
That's super disorienting.
The magic comes in when you start layering those three things on top of each other in different amounts. So you can apply that concept to position, to rotation, to zooming, to focus, and everything's about layering up these different noises. And then we also added on, just as a it's like almost the biggest part of the plugin, but a bonus part is smoothing out cameras and overshooting cameras. But we also applied that concept through a bunch of things where you can overshoot zooms, you can smooth out zooms, you can overshoot focuses, and it jumps all over the place. And then we also added in targeting. So it's a very easy way of doing soft targeting, a very easy way of doing targeting overshooting. And we started this process maybe in the middle of summer. We started prototyping it and building it up in Python and Expresso. It got passed off to the full-time coders here, who just happen to be my brothers because they're super kick-ass at C++. And
they're just super kick-ass in general.
Yep. And so my brother Joe put together 8,737 lines of code to make GorillaCam work. So with that set up, Chad, why don't I'm going to flip over to the full screen mode and you get your share going.
Cool. I will jump into a share. Let me know if this is coming through.
I see it. Looks like it's good. It should disappear, and let me make sure it's popped up on the screen. And let's let it rock. Also, anybody who happens to be hanging out in the stream, if you can send out a retweet or just let other people know so we can fill up the room a bit, that would be amazing. But here we go. Chad's got a GorillaCam up.
Yeah, so GorillaCam, as Chris was saying, kind of came up. I've always wanted a really robust camera shake, smoothing, overshoot plugin ever since I was even using 3ds Max. And when I started working at Greyscalegorilla, I was like, okay, maybe working here is the chance to finally get a camera plugin that I want to use. Because every other application I've ever used, it's always been sort of a pain. You either have to build a complex rig, or you use multiple vibrate tags, or maybe you're trying to use the motion camera. And each one of those is sort of interesting in certain ways, but limiting. And I wanted something that was fast and easy, robust, did what I wanted it to do. And we kind of ended up with GorillaCam. And like Chris was saying, the three pillars of GorillaCam are smoothing, overshoot, and shake. And these three things together, you can create super realistic cameras. And you can see here the scene that I've got. This is also on the product page as well. This is a pretty simple setup of a camera, but it's following this little UFO across the sky, and the UFO sort of dips down and the camera loses sight of it and it catches up. And so let's look at what's really driving. Let's look at the original camera of this GorillaCam. I'm going to do that just by double clicking the tag. This is what the camera is really doing. This is the Cinema 4D camera that I built. It's just I dropped in a camera, I pointed it towards the horizon, and all of that stuff, all of the looking around, the overshoot, the subtle zoom shifts, all of this is happening with GorillaCam, and it's really easy to set up. And that's it, just when I built this scene, I had this idea of like, well, we can do this targeting. I'm going to use signal to drive this UFO around, and I'm going to try to see if I can make it look like somebody standing on the roof capturing this UFO and like sending it out to their friends or whatever. So that is what this scene is all about. So let's go ahead and just build one of these from scratch. We could do that a couple different ways. I'm just going to go back into our original camera, and I'm going to go over to plugins, GorillaCam, and that's going to automatically create a GorillaCam with my reference camera already loaded. We're already looking through the GorillaCam. And now if we just hit play, we're not going to see anything because our camera is locked off. We have a locked off camera. Now we could come in here and just, if we're just looking to create some shake, we could just hit the I'm feeling lucky button, which is, dude, by the way, I'm feeling lucky is probably my favorite button. Well, one of my favorite buttons. So what I'm feeling lucky is doing is it's going to load a random setup for GorillaCam, and each time you hit it, you're going to get a completely different result. So you can just keep, if you wanted to, you could just keep hitting it until you find the vibe you want. That one's like crazy high frequency. This one's a little bit more languid, has a little bit of jolt in there. And Chris will go over some of the cool jolt settings in a minute, but like that feels pretty good from a shake perspective, and maybe we'll just keep it there. But you can see we're not following our UFO yet. So we need to set that up. We need to be able to have GorillaCam target our UFO. Well, if you notice over here, GorillaCam has a target tab. With an input, we could actually create our own target object, or we can drag something in there or select something to become the target object. I'm going to go ahead and unhide the UFO over here so that we can see that. And I'm just going to drag my UFO into that target. And now you're going to see GorillaCam immediately starts to watch the UFO. And you can see, I don't know if it's really coming through, but there's a little dot here. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to go ahead and go into the composition. I don't see if this may not come through, but hopefully you can see this little orange dot in the center of the screen because it's trying to keep it up with this little UFO.
Yeah, I can see it pretty well. I think it's going to come through on the stream.
All right, cool. So just, let's just look at just the target because I think that's kind of cool. So we have this ability over here with the on-off toggles to mute the different shakes. So we're going to mute the rotation and position shakes. So now we're only going to be focusing on the target. You can see now that with a little bit of target smoothing, our target we're actually falling behind the UFO. And, we don't know which direction this UFO is going to be going. So the idea of it being completely locked onto the UFO, if I bring this down to 0, it doesn't look very real because obviously we have no idea which direction that UFO is going to go. So we need some anticipation. We need to be able to make it feel like the camera is sort of trying to follow it. So I'm going to bring that target smooth up, and you can immediately see now it feels more human. It feels like somebody's like, oh shit, there's a UFO. I'm going to go over there and look at it. And we can also do this other cool thing too with overshoot. I can crank up this overshoot, and now the camera is going to overshoot the UFO if it ever catches up to it. Right there, it overshot it. And over here, it's probably going to overshot it right there. Came back around, tried to find it again. If you use too much of this, it just looks like you're a really bad camera operator and you can't find the UFO. So you kind of have to be a little bit goes a long way with something like this.
Yeah, for demonstration purposes, I almost always just kill off the smooth and just look at a little bit of overshoot just as a way of demonstrating what it's doing. Because
I'm actually liking how this is looking. I think what I want to do now is probably come back in and turn on our shake. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So now we're looking at it with target overshoot, with target smoothing, and some shake, and it's already looking way better. And just so we're clear, this is where we started. Like, this is the camera. This is what we came in with, and with very few clicks, you can get something very interesting and sort of realistic very quickly. In fact, we can go even further and have some fun with the zoom. I'm going to actually start, if we crank up the zoom drift medium, you're going to see we get this crazy crash zoom, constant motion on that. I think that's probably a bit much. I might do a little bit in the slow speed on the zoom. So it sort of looks like the person might be on their phone and they're pinching to zoom as the UFO kind of crosses over. It kind of makes for a more interesting shot, I think. Yeah, that's feeling pretty good.
Yeah, zoom's great for a scene like this.
Yeah, for a scene like this, it's kind of ideal. Or if you're doing like, paparazzi, or just want to make it feel sort of alive in some way. After this, the usually what I'll do is, if I'm sending it out to a render farm, and just by the way, let's just let's just get this out of the way. We've gotten this question a lot today. GorillaCam is completely compatible with just about every third-party renderer that I could think of, because it's just using a regular C40 camera. You can throw an Arnold camera tag on it, a Redshift camera tag on it, an Octane camera tag on it, and it'll act just like a regular camera. So don't have to worry about that. The one thing that I will say is that before you send it out to a farm, if you're doing anything with depth of field or motion blur, you probably want to use our quick bake button, which I'm just going to hit right now, which is just going to quickly bake out this camera into keyframes, so that now it could be sent to a render farm and not have to worry about whether or not it's actually going to render properly, or maybe you want to send it to somebody else on the team that they don't have it. You could actually just delete the tag at that point. We also have this nifty unbake, so you can always get back to where you were, which is pretty cool.
Just for some quick clarification, this is super important. It's actually interesting you hit that thing. We have two different types of bake right there. You can see we have a quick bake and a brute force bake. And what Chad is doing is he's got a UFO flying around, and it's randomly flying around, and it's using a signal tag, but that's pretty much like a vibrate tag, the way Chad's using it. So because the camera has a dependency in the rest of the scene, there's two different types of bake. So because of that, if you do a quick bake, it's going to almost instantly bake your entire camera all the way through. It's doing internal calculations. It's looking at its current keyframes and converting it internally. But if you have dependencies outside of the GorillaCam, in this case, a target moving around in a procedural type of way, or maybe you're targeting something that's dynamic, you need to do a brute force bake. There's a different button for brute force bake. And what that does is it virtually plays through the entire timeline. Now, Chad has a very simple scene here. So even clicking brute force bake, it's going to almost instantly finish. But if you had a very, very long scene that has like 100,000 X particles flying around and every frame takes 10 seconds to refresh, well, it's going to take 10 seconds per frame to calculate that. So you want to keep that in mind. But even in a scene like this, even with all the stuff Chad has in there, it was like 3 seconds to do a brute force bake. But just important to note that. Now you can see it is accurately chasing that around in spite of it being baked.
Thanks, Chris. I completely forgot about that. Anyway, forgot where I was. Yeah, so I think this scene was kind of a fun scene to show you guys some of the target overshoot and target smoothing. Chris, did you want to take over and maybe jump into a scene?
Totally. I want to show off some maybe slightly more technical things. So first of all, I want to make sure that I'm sharing my screen so that Chad can actually see what I'm doing. Otherwise, Chad has no idea what I'm going to be talking about as I'm going. So I'm going to share so Chad can see. Make sure I full screen again in case I go back over to Chad. But I'm going to jump on over into my Cinema 4D. And I've kind of got what we made as our universal... Yeah, I think I'm on the proper screen here. Yeah. Okay, we're chatting, we're sending. Okay, so this is the universal scene that we had made for testing GorillaCam, where we had all these different scales. There's a really tricky thing when you're working with cameras, and a lot of you probably run into this. I remember, especially back in the day when I was first playing, or first years of me playing with Cinema 4D, but before I was part of a team, I kind of worked at all these crazy scales. Like whatever I started working at, let's say I was modeling a car, the size of a cube meant it was about the size of a car. But if I was working in a building, that meant a cube was about the size of a building. And if I was working on a coffee cup, then a cube became a coffee cup. So GorillaCam makes the assumption that you're working at kind of a one-to-one scale, that a human is going to be about 5 or 6 feet, or 170 centimeters. So we've got all these different scales we deal with. So here's our kind of human scale. And then you'll see over here, we have our tiny scale. So we got these cameras here. And then we've got our big, giant, like building size scale, or like a house. And then we have our giant, like city size scale here, where you're kind of looking over an entire neighborhood. And we wanted to make sure GorillaCam worked for all of those different scales. So when you first pop open your GorillaCam, we haven't even mentioned it yet, but GorillaCam comes with a whole bunch of different presets. So right now, I'm actually going to have no camera selected. Like, just pretend that one's not there. It's not doing anything. I'm going to hide it so you don't think about it. So we've got nothing in the scene whatsoever. So we can go up to our plugin dropdown and click on GorillaCam. and it's going to say, hey, you don't have a camera. Do you want me to make one? And we say, yes. Yes, I do. It's going to automatically create a reference camera and a GorillaCam. One of the big things about GorillaCam is it's non-destructive. If you have a keyframed camera already doing something, then you just layer GorillaCam on top of it. If you have a motion camera, you layer GorillaCam on top of it. If you have a morph camera, you layer GorillaCam on top of it. Maybe you have a crazy camera animated with signal bouncing around doing all these crazy things. You can put GorillaCam on top of that already driven camera. So that's our reference cam. Here's our GorillaCam. So by default, just like Chad did, if I hit play, nothing is going to be happening. So one of the best, easiest things you can do is start playing around with different presets. So we've got all these different categories. So we got basic and cinematic, energetic. I had Chad go, I mentioned, Chad was making all these very realistic presets, all these things that were very practical, like subtle shakes. If we go to basic, you can see we got all these very subtle drifts and steady cams and handheld. I was like, yeah, but there's so many crazier, cooler things we could do. So he made an entire category called Bayhem to go and start putting in crazier things like karate turtles and giant asteroid, giant robots.
Yeah, can you actually name those movies? See if you can figure out what those
yeah,
movies
I'm not going to, but we'll let other people in the chat try and guess what the different movies are referencing.
Some of them are really obvious, but
yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
But we got all these different categories. We also have an all categories. You can go and click on that, and you'll see the reason that we separated them out is if I click on custom, this list is very long. We've got 60 presets in here, and it might be a little hard to find the specific one you want. But we can go ahead to something really clean, like let's go to like a steady cam. And you see we're now, like my dead static camera is now alive. It's moving around. There's some nice slow drifting movement. And you can see whenever you click on any preset, all the different settings automatically jump around to the different things. And that includes going into the advanced tab, which we'll be talking about in a little bit. All these different ratios, all these different shakes, these different jolts, all of it set up nice and subtle. And then we can go and jump to a crazier one, which is, you've got an action film preset. So still not insane, but like there's a little bit of like maybe you're running behind a person. But then we have crazier ones where we might do something like giant robots where you're going to get these stomps kind of coming around, or we've got jet fighter and just a touch and news chopper and
somebody on the chat just suggested one that we have to build now.
Yeah.
Selfie stick.
Oh yeah, we didn't do that. I made a crazy one dodging bullets. So this one's like you're running through a battlefield, like jumping around, like trying to dodge bullets as you're going. So lots of different presets built up in there. Now that's one way you can get the presets, and I actually want to talk about this specifically. Right now we are looking at people. GorillaCam is assuming you're at a human scale. So our overall scale is set to 100, and we're kind of at the scale of a bunch of people standing here. So these things should all look good at that size. I want to find something that's maybe a little more straightforward. Basic shake. Let's see what that does. So, okay, here we just got some nice moving around. It looks good at this scale. Now, let's go ahead and jump into a different scale. So I have to jump back to my reference camera to make changes. So a quick way of doing that is double-clicking the GorillaCam tag, and that's automatically going to select the reference camera and go to the POV of the reference camera. So let's go ahead and zoom out to something really big, like the whole building. We're looking at the whole town. I want to go back to GorillaCam, so I'm going to go back to that POV. Let's rewind so the camera can snap back to it. And if I hit play, you see we're getting the rotation, but we're not getting too much movement. And I want to accentuate this. I'm going to zero out all of our rotation. So I could zero out these sliders, or you could click this zero rotation button, and that'll zero them all out for you. But now you can see our positional movement. And you can see that it's not really moving that much. It's not moving that much because we're still at a human scale. So you can go and change your overall scale slider. But we also made some buttons. If you built everything kind of real world scale, I'm going to click the skyscraper button. And now you can see that my position is moving around in a much bigger, broader way. It feels the same as it did when we were looking at people, but at this much larger scale. And to exaggerate this, I'm going to go ahead and jump back to our GorillaCam. Let's go from building scale all the way back down here. And I'm going to zoom up on these tiny little cameras here. So now we get these little cameras here. And if I were to jump back to our GorillaCam's POV and let that refresh and hit play, you're going to see like we're underground. It's so far down. And if I let this wait long enough, I think we'll probably drift above. I'm going to actually, so now we're above ground. The point being is we're at a skyscraper scale. You can't tell what's going on. So you need to shrink it down. But what size are we at? Well, those cameras are close to a coffee cup. So let's go ahead and click the coffee cup button, and boom, instantly we have gone to the scale of about a coffee cup, which you can see here is 20%. And now the same way it felt when we were zooming around the building, it feels that way when we're zooming around this camera. Now, scale is everything to do with position, because rotation, it doesn't matter how big you are. If you have some rotation at 10 degrees one direction, it's going to be 10 degrees if you're close or far away from something. So that really doesn't matter. But we can go and reintroduce some of that rotation back in here. Let's see, what is the next thing we should talk about? Because there's so many fun things to talk about in GorillaCam.
I would say depth of field.
Ooh, okay, depth of field. Do I? Oh, I wonder if I have that scene file where I had been chasing a car around. I'm not sure that I do, actually.
I have the other one if you need it.
I don't have that handy. If you have a good depth of field, actually, your computer plays depth of field better, so I can switch back over to you for that, and I can figure out what I'll talk about next.
Yeah, let me load that up.
Okay, let me know when you got it, and I'll just keep talking. So we are also talking about that, but a really fun thing to mention is not only do you have all the presets you can cycle through and find ones that you like and be like, oh, that's one I like. If you were to click on something, what's one? Here's like, or actually, let's go for a crazier one. Where's Chased by Bees? That one's really fun.
I love that one.
Yeah, Chased by Bees. So here's a preset called Chased by Bees. And let's switch over to our GorillaCam. Okay, so you see right here, it's running all over the place. The camera's looking in every direction. Let's say you click on this one and you really like it as a preset. You like the way this looks. I'm going to click back on human. I'm on the wrong scale. So you can see it's shaking around like you're being chased by bees. You're ready to go jump into a lake somewhere. But you're like, you know what? It's a little bit too intense. There's a little bit too much going on. So you could go through and grab all these sliders and kind of drag them to the halfway point. But without ever going into any of these extra sliders, you could just be like, I like this preset. It's a little too intense. So I'm going to pull back on my position intensity. I'm going to pull back on my rotation intensity. And so now we're about 50-50 on each of those. And you can see it's calmed it down quite a bit. Same feel, same vibe, but it's calmed it down. Or if it isn't quite crazy enough, go ahead and pull it above 100%. And these are on clamps, so you can go completely off the rails. And you see that's getting a little intense there. And then in addition to that, we have a randomize seeds button. So even though we're still just in the context of going to presets, you could be like, oh, I like the way this looks, but this whole part at the end, we're just looking up in the sky. That's not really showing me anything. And you just click randomize seed. And it's the same feel, it's the same vibe, but a completely different animation, completely different the
randomized seed is huge for me, because that's like, I find I feel lucky until I find something that I like, or I'll jump into a preset and then I'll just hit randomize seed a bunch of times until I land on a framing that looks good.
Yeah, like this one's great, but it's hovering me up a little bit too high. So I'd be like, you know what, randomize seed, and then okay, maybe now it's going a little bit too low. Let's randomize seed again.
Crotch cam. There you go, perfect.
Yeah, so that one's looking good, at least for that part of it. And then maybe really quickly, because I was kind of talking about the shake system before we pass it off to Chad, one last thing to talk about would be, you even kind of see it here. We're up a little bit too high, and then sometimes as we're scrubbing through, it goes a little bit too low. So we kind of got this over-the-head cam and then that crotch cam when it goes too low. So in addition to having the shake system, and I didn't even really break it down. Give me a few more minutes here, Chad. I got cool stuff to talk about.
No, take your time, dude.
So let's just talk really quickly about kind of the idea of fast, medium, and slow. So we've got a camera here, and it's kind of zeroed out. There's not really any motion. So actually, I'm even going to set this to, I'm going to go back to a default. So this is zeroing out all the settings. So it's as if you're making a brand new GorillaCam. So if I were to do some position slow, let's go ahead and drag in a whole bunch of position slow, and you're going to see that our camera is very slowly moving around a whole bunch. Let's zero that out. Let's look at some medium. You can see that it's moving around not as much, but a lot more quickly. And medium is my go-to. Medium, I always feel, is kind of the human scale. That's the one that feels natural. And then you've got the crazy one, which is fast. In order to show you what fast does, I'm going to get rid of all of our shake smoothing, and let's go ahead and crank that up a bit. So you can see as I pull this up, we're getting this very tiny, rapid jittering motion. So in general, I don't tend to put too much of that. But, let me show you what the shake smooth does. As we add a whole bunch of that jitter, as I add in shake smooth, it's going to start taking the edge off of it. It's smoothing out the entire motion. And to make it super blatant, let's crank this like almost all the way. And now you can see, even though we just have this tiny little jittery move, it has really smoothed it out and calmed the whole thing down. Now, by its nature, the smoothing is automatically going to affect the fast the most and the medium a little bit. I don't think it affects slow almost at all, because it's very big, slow movements. You can't really smooth that out too much. Now, of course, the magic comes in combining all of these. Me and Chad just stylistically have, I think, different approaches approaches to this, but I tend to use not very much slow because slow has big movements to it. So it's going to move my framing maybe beyond what I want it to. But I like adding in a decent amount of medium. Let's get a decent amount of this medium motion going because it's just it's the human scale. And then just the hair of the fast one, just add that extra layer of imperfection, and then a little bit of smoothing on top of that to take the edge off. And I tend to use a fairly similar ratio on my rotation. And it's like that's a calm, active camera. Like it feels alive without going nuts. But I'm going to go ahead and exaggerate this a bit so we can go and talk about our ratios. So you can see right now that I have a camera that is moving quite a bit on the medium speed, and I'm going to increase our medium rotation. Actually, I'm going to crank up the rotation quite a bit. So you see we got lots of rotation and quite a bit of movement. So I'm going to jump into the advanced tab, and we've got a tab here called global shake and jolt ratios. And this is how much of X, Y, and Z that you want to apply to this current preset. So let's say we're driving down a bumpy road. This is my favorite example. We're going down a bumpy road. A bumpy road, you're hitting potholes and you're kind of bouncing up and down in your car. You're not bouncing left and right that much. You're bouncing up and down. So I'm going to get rid of all of my X and get rid of all of the Z. And now you can see the camera is physically moving only up and down. And we can do the same thing on rotation. Let's say as we're bumping, our head is kind of bobbing up and down, but it's not looking left or right. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the heading and the banking, and now you can see we're only looking up and down, and we're only moving up and down. So this is affecting the ratios. Now I actually wouldn't ever zero those out, like maybe drop this down to maybe 30% of what it is and drop this down to about 30% of what it is. So now most of our motion is up and down, but not all of it. Now, you also see we have our seed setting here. So instead of randomizing it, we can type in the specific number, find the number we want. And then the last two settings I'll talk about before I give it to Chad is the shake speed and the speed variation. So right now there's lots of different variations going on in here. We've got positional, like shake, and we got jolt going on. We haven't talked about that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But we've got everything's controlled by this global speed. Let's say you want to speed just everything up a little bit. You could open up the chase by bees and be like, it's going too fast. What you can do here is just slow it down. So now everything is moving at half the speed that it used to. It's just going to calm, like the slow is at half the speed. The fast is at half of its speed. Everything is slowed down. You can, of course, increase it. So now at 200%, this is maybe feeling a little bit more like our bumpy road. Maybe it's a little extreme. This is potholes from hell, but we got some nice bounce going on in there. And then I want to talk about the speed variation because that's pretty cool. The way I like describing the speed is it's actually a variable that's changing time. You can imagine GorillaCam is kind of passing forward in a linear way through time. So time is constant. So I'm going to get rid of all the speed variation. And that's as if your timeline is moving along at a constant speed. It's going to look weird in my viewport, but you picture this moving forward in a constant speed. Now, when you start adding on speed variation, and I'm just going to go crazy and crank it up all the way, and we'll maybe see it in the viewport, but let me explain what it's doing. It's as if time can be going faster or slower. So instead of it moving along in a linear fashion, GorillaCam is interpreting time by going maybe very slowly, and then maybe normal, and then speeding up, and then slowing down, then speeding up and slowing down. So time itself now has some variation to it, and it's just another fun layer to make it feel more imperfect. So your medium speed movements aren't always at a constant speed. There's some variation to that medium speed. So I almost always leave at least 25% on the speed variation. If you crank up to 100, your camera could technically stop for a second where time is not progressing at all, because it's actually taking the total current speed and it can go double that. Well, it takes that amount and can add to it or subtract to it. So this would actually be anywhere at 100%. This 200 would be anywhere from 0 to 400 speed variation is what's actually happening behind the scenes. And just those two things layered up on top of each other give you so many more possibilities of just adding more imperfection, more variation, really layering these things up. So are you good for me to switch over to you, Chad?
Yeah, did you want to jump? I feel like we've been talking a lot. Maybe we should answer some questions before we jump back into another demo, or what do you think?
Let's do it. I guess we should just keep the screens up. I'm going to just pop open the chat here and see what people are talking about. So what's going on, everybody? We got a bunch more people hanging out. We got Urban Polar Bear and, of course, Dead Mouse. We got Casey is hanging out. Crossfader, thanks as always. Intelligent Machine, thanks everybody for coming on in. We got some regulars, we got some new people. What's going on? I got some old school names I haven't seen in a while. So let's see. Do you have any questions in the roster already, Chad, or should I just look through here?
Everybody, I think, was asking whether or not it would work with the motion camera. Does it work on splines? Does it work in the traditional sort of ways that people are animating cameras?
100% works on top of everything else because it's referencing an existing camera. I'm going to do a super quick demo here, but let's go ahead and I'm going to delete my cameras entirely. I'm going to go to a top view and let's just zoom in here and let's just do maybe a particular workflow. I'm going to just draw a spline. So I'm going to draw a spline where this is kind of traveling through that. Let me smooth this one out a little bit. T for scale, scale it up. R for rotate, just make that a little bit smoother. So we got a nice little arc going here. So let's go ahead into our 3D view. I'm gonna hit E for move. Let's move this up to maybe eye level. Cool. Make a camera. Let's go ahead and link this camera to the spline by creating a Cinema 4D align to spline. The spline is going to be this one, and I could use signal. I love using signal, but why don't we just go ahead and keyframe? I'm going to turn this on tangential so it's locked to the spline. At the time of 0, position should be 0. I'm going to hit play, and let's see, just about this amount of time I want to have be passed right about there. I want this moved up to a position of 100%. So I guess we kind of get out of the frame of some of our people, but you can see if I hit play that we're going to now travel along the spline in a nice smooth way. Maybe I would even want to slow that down a little bit, so I'm going to drag that keyframe further. So this is what we get. So cool, we got that ready. So here's our camera. I've got the camera selected. Let's go ahead and select plugins, GorillaCam. Boom, it automatically changes the name to be a reference name. If you already custom named it, it won't change your name, but if it's a generic name, then it's going to automatically adapt it. Automatically creates GorillaCam, automatically links to the POV of the GorillaCam, automatically selects the GorillaCam settings. We can go ahead and, we could just go ahead and hit play right now, and it would be smoothing and overshooting slightly, but just to show you, to layer on top of that existing camera, let's go ahead and find I'm going to do a crazy one. Let's do earthquake. We're at human scale. Always check your scale. I am at human scale. So this is going to be going nuts and shaking, but you see we're now traveling that spline with the shake on top of it. But not only that, I'm not going to demo that right now, but we could have the camera be overshooting from this movement. We could have this camera be going smoother from that existing movement. And this could be a morph cam. This could be anything, something you keyframed. It could be a camera that came in from some sort of mocap. It will always layer up on top of the existing one. It's non-destructive, and I can always just double-click GorillaCam, jump back to the POV of that original camera, and it's just going to still be alive and undisturbed entirely. And we could go and edit that spline, and GorillaCam would just move along and adapt to the new one.
Nice. I think that answers that question. So as far as the camera morph goes, it's the same concept. You can I think the way to think about it, and it's sort of we've been dealing with GorillaCam for a while now, so for us it's sort of like, well, yes, of course it can do that, but we understand that, yeah, it's a different kind of concept, but think about GorillaCam as a module that you put on top of your existing camera. And if you think about it that way, then you think, okay, well, does it work with a motion camera or a morph camera? Yes. Does it work with a motion camera? Yes. Does it work with a stationary camera, a camera with a target? Yes, yes. So anything that is using a regular old Cinema 4D camera, imagine this like a module on top of it that just makes it feel more human, gives it some shake, some overshoot, some focal drift. That's probably one of my favorite bits is the focal drift. Well, actually, shake is obviously the top thing for me, but I think the focal drift is probably a close second.
Oh yeah,
because it actually, I have that scene.
I was gonna say, do you want to do the focus stuff? Because man, focus stuff is cool.
Well, do we have any? Is there any questions? Anybody want to see anything particular? I could show focus.
Well,
drift.
Why don't you show focus? You show focus, and I will monitor here and have a question ready for when you wrap up the focus stuff. So
okay, cool. Let me share my screen. I'm not sharing yet.
Okay, and I'll tab over to you in a second. Let's see. Somebody said they had a good question here. Just a bit. Can you modify depth of field, soft defocus? Oh yeah, that's what you're about to do. So that is the question. So you're ready to rock. So I'm going to flip the screen. Let me show the. Nope. Let me stay on this screen. Go to Discord, full screen. Okay, now we're seeing Chad's screen, and I am going to go monitor the chat and find whatever the next question is. So, dope.
Cool. All right, so we have like a pretty simple scene here, tabletop setup. We got a couple of cameras, and for those of you who are sort of like wondering what's the deal with this depth of field, how's he doing this? This is R19. In R19, they've got this nice display option where you can turn on depth of field in the viewport, which actually looks pretty good. I was kind of surprised at how good it looked. So this is a great way to sort of demo what GorillaCam depth of field is doing. So our original camera that I built is just this really jank linear camera. Starts off on these markers and with linear keyframes pops up here and just stops instantly. It's very, very much a dead sort of move. But with a little bit of GorillaCam, you can tell that right off the bat. Just going to rewind it. It just adds that little bit of realism. And what I really like about it is this focal depth, the ability to track focus either on an object or a null, and through the scene it will overshoot the focus to kind of give you that effect where somebody is maybe live trying to maintain focus on something and they overshoot the focus, or maybe they just aren't sure where they are in the focus, so you get a little bit of that focal drift. Some people call it what did somebody call it? Breathing focus, I think is another term for it. All right, so what do we have here? Let me jump into, let me unhide the stuff. I just wanted you to see this focal point null that I'm animating through the scene. So you've got this focal point null that I just animated very linearly through this shot. It starts at the markers, goes to the Nikon in the far back, then it kind of swings back up to this one up front. And all I did was go into GorillaCam and go over to the focal tab and choose that focal point. I'm just going to drag it in there as my focal point object, or you can have it create one if you want on its own. And right away, you have the input smoothing and overshoot for the focus and also the focus drift. Now, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the focus drift altogether, and we're just going to look at the smoothing and the overshoot. And the easiest way to do that is going to be to come into the top view and actually see the GorillaCam itself, because sometimes it's not exactly easy to tell where your focal plane is. So that's where this kind of comes in handy. So you can see this very front edge of my camera right here is what's in focus. And you can see I've got just a little bit of overshoot, not a lot. It's also got no smoothing. So when that focal object snaps back to that Nikon in the back, it's very sort of linear. So I'll probably want to add a little bit of smoothing to that to make it feel a little less harsh. And then also I can increase the overshoot if I want to go really crazy with it. I could actually, let's just rewind this back down. You can see it's going to overshoot it by quite a bit. And then it comes back. That's probably a bit much, but when you're dealing with focus, sometimes you have to take it a little bit far just to be able to see it. So I'm going to look through the actual camera here and just see if that's working. It's actually not that bad. If we went any further with it, then we might have some problems. But I feel like that feels pretty good. The other thing I'm going to do is do this focal. What did I call it? Breathing focus. Breathing focus. I don't know why that sounds weird to say, but we're going to do that with the focus drift. So let's just go back up into a top view just so you can easily see what's going on. I'm going to zero out all this stuff just so you can just focus on the actual focus drift. Now think of focus drift as shake for your focus. So I have a slow shake on my focus drift, which is going to like take it wildly out, in and out.
Yeah, you got to be subtle with that thing.
You got to be subtle with this one. So maybe like a 0.5 would probably be good. So it just adds that another little bit of that human touch that makes a camera feel like a person is behind it and it's not just stock out of the computer. So the other thing I'm going to do is turn up a little bit of the media, maybe put in like, I don't know, like 5. That's probably way too crazy, but I wanted to show you what that looks like in the actual shot so we can sort of see it. Now it's looking like this person has no idea where the focus is and they're just kind of going crazy. But a little bit of that goes a long way if I just set that to like 1. Now the fast is fast, and it's probably going to be too fast for most, but sometimes you want that. Sometimes you want that like really fast, subtle sort of bit of focus change in your shot. In this case, I might bring this down to like a 0.5. Actually, I kind of liked it higher, maybe like 2. Feels pretty good. Yeah, that feels pretty good. And in case you're wondering, I kind of glazed over this a little bit, but if we jump into our original camera, again, this is what our original camera was doing. And if I adjust my f-stop of this original camera, it'll actually adjust the depth of field here in my viewport in R19. So if we wanted to make this even like blurrier, we could do that just like that. And let's just jump back into our GorillaCam so we can see what it's doing. So yeah, again, I mean, I always love coming. This always kind of blows my mind to like look at the original camera and how sort of janky it was. Not to say that you should start animating your cameras like crappily, but it's just it's great to know that GorillaCam is going to take your camera and instantly sort of make it feel a bit more human. And getting back to what Chris was saying before, Chris was mentioning the different ways that you can sort of treat the shake system, and he mentioned that he doesn't like to use a lot of low, and I do. I want to defend my use of low for.
I just said we had different styles.
I want to defend. I want to defend my position on slow. So, a lot of the times when you're doing a shot like this, you don't want to use too much fast shake because it ends up feeling sort of cheap. It ends up feeling like somebody shot this with a cheap camera, either a phone or a GoPro or something like that. And I want it to feel intimate, but I also don't want it to feel cheap. So I'll usually throw in a lot of the position slow to sort of offset the fact that I've got a pretty linear camera here, and I want to create some interesting. I want to create a shot where maybe it feels like the person found these objects. So it feels a little bit more spontaneous. If I can do that with low, I'm going to jump into the advanced tab and actually change some of my settings in X and Z, which are basically just going to allow the camera to travel a bit farther. So now it sort of has more of the feeling that I'm looking for, which is I want it to feel like the camera operator is finding all these objects on the floor. And the only way I'm going to be able to do that is with some nice, big, languid sort of moves. And I'm just going to hit shake a few times, or sorry, randomize seed a few times until I find a framing that I like. Let me see how that one starts. That one might, this one actually looks pretty good. So now we're starting. This one just happens to be a bit more about the markers and less about the cameras at the beginning.
That does look pretty sexy. I'll give you that one.
So this isn't going to work for everything, because if you obviously you have some action that you're following, then that's going to dictate where the camera should look, obviously. But if you have a shot like this, you can just start making these really organic sort of moves. And like if you like this one but you're not sure, you could do a couple things. Usually what I'll do, if I don't save a preset, I'll just control drag and create another one of the copy of these like that. And then I'll jump into this GorillaCam and I'll just change the seed on that one until maybe I find a different one that I like. And maybe I want this one to go a little bit higher on Y. So I'll come over here, jump back into the main tab. I'm just going to hit randomize seed until I find one that I like. And that one's going too far. Well, this one might not be bad. Let's see how this one starts. All right, so now we've got two completely different looks. We've got this one, which we just did before, this one right here. And then we've got this new one right here, and they're both live. They're both there. They can be edited. They can be baked. They can be saved into presets, and we can always come back to our original camera if we need to. So you're not having to start with some crazy rig with a bunch of vibrate tags. You don't have to, mess around with a bunch of hierarchical sort of camera rigs. You can just work the way that you want to work, and then throw GorillaCam on top when you're ready.
Yes, sir, dude.
Yeah.
We've been working on this for so long. Like the chat's saying that I'm going full Schmidt, which I am. I'm just so excited to be finally showing this off. Like I've been geeking out about with just like a dozen people, like people working on it, and some of our beta testers, and to actually show this to the rest of the world is just so cool.
So this is another shot.
This is your tribute to Pacific Rim.
Yeah, exactly. So this is this is a camera morph, and I love the Pacific Rim titles that Imaginary Forces did. So I have this mech model, and I was basically just testing to see if GorillaCam would work with a camera morph, because the camera morph is just a great way to move a camera around complex objects. And so yeah, let's just do that really quick. Now in this particular case, I'm probably not going to go too crazy. In fact, I'm going to delete the original GorillaCam that we have in there. I'm going to grab our reference cam and just grab a GorillaCam, so it's automatically going to select that camera. Now we're looking through our GorillaCam, And because the camera morph already has a bunch of smoothing on it, I don't really need to do any of that. I don't need to smooth it out anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and zero out zero out my initials, which is going to zero out all of my initial position and rotation smoothing. So now we're just going to be looking at the shake. And again, I'll probably mess around with focus too, but for right now, I'm going to do the shake. So a couple, let's just jump into a preset. Let's grab maybe, let's go into energetic and do, there's one of my favorite ones in here. I believe it's called, you know what? It might be under cinematic. Oh man, I might have to jump into all. I don't remember what I called it. I think it's like main titles or something.
See, this is why we spend so much time, and I'm feeling lucky.
Yeah, I know, right? We don't even remember. Oh, title sequence. Here it is. Let's go back to the beginning. So this just has, I don't know if it's coming through the stream, but just a subtle amount of drift. Again, I'm going to zero out my initials because I don't want any of that positional overshoot or smoothing happening. I just want to see the shake. I'm going to add a little bit more slow, a little bit more medium. And I guess if we want to make it feel more energetic, I could raise the fast quite a bit. And I'm going to check my advanced tab and see where my noise speed is at. The other thing that I love that we added is the speed variation. Did you cover that?
Oh,
I can't remember.
Yeah, I did. Totally covered it.
Okay, cool, sweet. So that I'm just going to, I always like to raise that up because I don't like anything to feel too, I don't want it to feel too uniform. And that's looking pretty good. I'm going to add just some jolt in here. I already have some in here, but I'm just going to add a little bit more just to kind of make it feel a little bit more interesting. All right, cool. And now this is already feeling much better. I'm going to go into my focus tab, and it's automatically sort of following the focus of my reference camera, so I don't need to worry about putting a focus object because all of that is being driven by the camera morph. I am going to, however, add some drift just to make it feel a little bit more interesting. Probably not that much. There we go. Just a little bit to let that focus breathe and not feel so absolutely perfect. And there, I mean, dude, like that's pretty much it. I mean,
yeah, play through that.
I would probably animate that because the focus drift is a little bit heavy at the end.
Or just different random seeds.
Yeah, just try maybe.
But now go back to your original camera and then.
All right, so the original camera is this, which by the way is not bad.
Yeah, no, that's a fun movement.
Yeah, and it's a camera morph, which they all look great.
So you got
should we try something? And
well, now let's just see a GorillaCam playthrough.
All right, so here's the GorillaCam version.
So you got all those beautiful locked off shots, but you're keeping the camera alive.
Yeah, it's just
I love it. I love it.
Little subtleties, you know. You know what? I don't. This might break, and we're just gonna try it. We're just gonna see what happens.
Uh-oh, Chad's going off the rails.
I'm going off the rails here. So let's just jump back into our camera morph. And I don't know why you'd ever want to do this, but if you decided for whatever reason that your camera morph was going to be linear, and your camera morph ended up looking like this. So we're looking through the original camera right now, linear and linear. So it's not actually that last one.
That's not that bad. That's still feels smooth.
Well, you know what? Let's do.
Oh, do you know? It's probably because of the keyframe that you're blending between is nice and smooth.
We're gonna go ahead and just jank it up, dude. We're gonna make it linear all the way around.
All the way.
So now it's linear. It's gonna feel so gross. Boom. And eventually, boom, which is really bad. All right, now let's just see. We're gonna put GorillaCam to the test on the smoothing.
I think you're going to pass through the object, but it's going to make it nice and smooth.
We probably will. So let's go ahead and turn off all the shake because I just want to focus on the smoothing right now. Let's go ahead and bring our smoothing up to like, I don't know, let's just crank it all the way up to 100. And our overshoot, I don't want to use a lot, but the initial rotation smoothing, 100. Don't want a ton of rotational smoothing. And let's make sure we're at the beginning. Okay, let's see what this looks like. Yep, smooth it out.
Nice, slow, and there's even that little overshoot at the end too. There was actually not enough frames to get to the end, but it was totally going.
Let me turn off the focal stuff. It's distracting me. Yeah, there we go. we could probably extend the timeline too. So it did. It smoothed it out just like it would. I mean, that's not really what I would do. I'd probably use the camera morph the way it was intended to, but I just wanted to see if it
You
would
want
do
to break it to see if GorillaCam could fix it.
exactly. I wanted to make it as crappy as I could. Let's go back in. Let's see just how. Let's really overshoot the position and make it go crazy. And I'm also going to turn the shake back on, and just to make it look ultra ridiculous, we're going to make it an earthquake. And now it just doesn't make any goddamn sense.
Well, this could work if this thing was like stomping through the streets.
Oh yeah, that's true. This could be like an action sequence, maybe that thing's animating. Let's hit random seed till we find like a better framing. There we go. Sorry, I'm just sipping my coffee because I have to catch up with Chris. He's like talking so fast. I'm like, oh my God, I must sound like I'm drunk compared to him. Anyway, yeah, so that's camera morphs and focus, and yeah, let's jump into the chat and see what people.
Yeah, I've been looking. Everybody seems to just kind of be excited in general. We seem to be covering all the questions. For some new people who came in, yes, it works with, as far as I know, every third-party renderer. If the third-party renderer uses a Cinema 4D camera as its base, I know something like Octane, like you put a tag onto the camera, that will continue to work. I'm gonna jump over to my scene so that maybe Chad doesn't want to be sharing whatever he's doing over there.
Yeah, I'm gonna load up while you talk. I'm gonna load up a pre-rendered sequence that has that bot in it, so you can see.
Oh yeah,
it
definitely.
So that I did in Redshift, so you can. It's proof. It's proof that it works.
But we know it works, and we've personally directly tested in Redshift, Octane, and Arnold. We've gotten confirmation from beta testers that is working in V-Ray and Corona. Any renderer that uses a Cinema 4D camera in any way, this should be able to layer up on top of it. It's an animation tool, so at that point it's render independent, which is really fun. So Chad's gonna have. Let me know when you get that, Chad, so I can flip back over to you.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Yeah, okay, so we're going back on over to Chad here. Yeah. What did you render this out in?
This was using Redshift, Gorilla, and our Gorilla Grade LUTs, which we, if you haven't checked those out, just check them out. They're like a bunch of look LUTs to do different sort of color, cinematic sort of color grade LUTs. And this was, rendered up on Pixel Plow with Redshift.
I'm sure you got an HDR in there.
Yep. So I think
this is just dripping with Greyscalegorilla products.
Yeah, HDRI Link. Yeah, it's pretty much got a lot of them in here. I don't think I use Signal.
No, well, that's because you could have used Signal to drive the morph to get to the final thing. True. That would have worked really well. Come on, Chad, you dropped the ball.
Sorry, dude.
So if you don't have anything specific, Chad, I might jump in and talk about Jolt.
Yeah, go for it.
All right, I'm gonna switch over while I'm gonna jump over here and show you it's almost every part of this plugin is my favorite part of the plugin, but this one is particularly my favorite part of the plugin. I really like the Jolt system, and when Chad was originally explaining like the basic part of the concept, I was like, I don't get it. Like, what is the point of it? And it quickly turned into my favorite thing to tinker around with because it enables so many kind of stylistic additions. So in addition to the shake system that we did, I'm back into my scene. Why don't we go find a slightly different framing just so that we're not looking at these people the whole time. Let's go up onto a rooftop here. Look out over the gray city here. It's mostly a palm tree forest. So we're still human scale because we're kind of standing here on a rooftop, but let's go right around here. And let's go ahead and create a GorillaCam. And yes, I want to create a new one. It's not moving. Nothing's going to be happening. So we've got, in addition to our shake system here, we've got a Jolt system. And the Jolt is similar to the shake system, except it's only happening occasionally. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of these settings here. So right now we've got position intensity and rotation intensity, but we have an interval of 0, so it's never happening. So I'm going to go ahead and set an interval of 55. And let's go ahead and hit rewind, and let's just take a look at what we get. So see how the camera's just sitting there, and then suddenly we get a little bump. And the camera shakes around and it moves around. So what's happening is every block of 55 frames, one of these intervals is going to trigger. So this is a random, every once in a while, you're bumping the camera. And so we get this whole system that we put together. of ways of controlling this. So these are very subtle. Like there's a subtle bump of the camera. But let's go ahead and crank these up higher. So now we're really knocking the camera. So now you see when it gets hit, it's kind of shaking all over the place. It's going to calm down, but then get bumped again and shake all over the place. And then get bumped again, shake all over the place. So that is using interval. We could make the intervals long. We could make them short. But this might actually show a setting pretty well. With our interval being about 55, if I crank this up high enough, we're going to be knocking the camera around so roughly that it doesn't have time to calm down back to its original position before it gets bumped again. So we have another setting here, which is the fall off. And that's how quickly the bump recovers. So let's go ahead and crank this up quite a bit. And now we should feel a bump, a pretty big bump from the camera, and it calms down quickly. And another big bump, and it calms down. In addition to that, we have our jolt smooth. And that is just like some of the other smooths, like the shake smooth, we're taking the edge off of it. But it's also kind of how quickly it transitions into this jolt. So if we get rid of this entirely, I'm going to calm this down because it's going to be way too much. But if I get rid of this entirely, you're going to see when it hits, it's like the camera got hit by a hammer, which is like, boom, snapping to this new position. So even just putting in a couple percent, it's going to go a long way to just calming that camera down on the edge. So every 55 frames, we're getting this nice big boom shake on there. But layering this stuff up to create additional movements, like I was talking about the bumpy road concept. Well, maybe the bumpy road before is just happening all the time. It's like shaking and shaking and shaking. Well, as an alternative, why don't we say that I want this to bump every about 25 frames? So you see we're getting bump, 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 and these feel like very specific bumps. We can go back into advanced, and the global shake and jolt ratios affect jolt as well. So I can go back to being mostly bouncing up and down and mostly looking up and down. So now every time we hit this bump, you see that I'm looking and shaking up and down. So the ratios carry through. The speed and the speed variation carry through to these settings as well. The seed carries on, and a setting we haven't mentioned, and it's not worth spending much time on it, but we also have a time offset. Let's say you have a client who's like, oh, I love everything that's happening, but you know where that bump happens? Can that happen 5 frames earlier? You could go ahead and type in -5.
I forgot about that.
Yeah,
we totally forgot about that.
You can go ahead and type in -5, and it's going to rewind effectively the entire camera's animation back 5 frames. When it comes to the shaking system, it's not like it being keyframed and smoothing out. That stays the same no matter what. But this will offset all of the different shaking types. So I'm going to kind of put all these back to about normal here. And then, yeah, so that's these settings all combine really nicely. You get these nice shakes on top of it. You can make them more intense, less intense, have them shake around. But in addition to having this hit at at these kind of random intervals, we also added in a custom trigger. And this is a big thanks to one of our beta testers who actually requested being able to do this. Is we can also type in a custom time. I'm going to put my interval down to 0, and I'm going to say I actually want a bump to happen on frame 25 and on frame 100. So I typed in 25, 100. Let's rewind our animation, and now you can see at frame 25 we get a bump, and then at frame 100 we get a bump. And those are the only 2 jolts that happen in the entire animation. Another thing that's cool is we can layer up these 2 different settings, the interval and the custom trigger. So we can say I want a random one every 55 frames, but I also want to be sure that one hits on 25, and I want to be sure that one hits on 100. The rest of them can be random, but those have to hit, because maybe you have an animation of somebody's, I think Chad actually has an example scene of like somebody's running down the street and a big boulder falls. But if this is kind of a, day after tomorrow type situation, everything's crashing and crunching around, you want some randomness, but then you also have the big boulder that lands next to you, and you want to make sure it hits on that one specifically. And not that we ever really go into it, but also keep in mind that all of these parameters could be keyframes. So you could say that you want this jolt happening all the time, but at a certain point, like keyframe the intensity to go down or be higher at a particular time. So this stuff can layer up that way as well. Do you have something specific, Chad, or I was just going to talk about recording presets?
Yeah, no, just the offset again. That was huge for us because I think we've all sort of built camera rigs that are using vibrate tags or whatnot, and something will happen at a very specific time that'll just work out, and then the client will be like, I like that what the camera does right there. Can we just have it time out with this other thing in the shot? And then you're kind of screwed because that was completely like you're not in control of that unless you baked it out and slid all the keyframes around. But yeah, that time offset was a huge deal.
It was a really straightforward one. You're like, hey, can I rewind this 20 frames? I was like, oh, that's a good idea. We should program that.
I love when that happens.
I guess while I've got you guys, I want to go and say maybe the last big giant setting that we haven't really talked about is our ability to have you record your own presets. So let's go ahead and take a look at that really quickly. In fact, let's even continue from here. I've got this nice shake happening. Every once in a while it takes a big hit, but I want to be alive a little bit more often. Let's say we've kind of got a Cloverfield monster stomping through the city here. Let's go ahead and add in some slow drift. Let's go ahead and keep the camera alive with some medium. Let's definitely add in some small shake. The edge is already being taken off. Let's take the camera alive here. I'm going to do big rotational drifts on here. Nice big slow one. So now you can see the camera's alive. It's moving around. Now, one thing that definitely happens is you see how our camera's kind of tilting left and right, like we're tilting our head to the side. We probably don't want much of that. So jumping into advanced and grabbing our banking and really pulling that down helps a lot. So we're not tilting the camera. I mean, when you're holding a camera, you often will look up, look down, look left, look right, but you don't often tilt it. So that will get rid of that, or at least chill it out a little bit. So let's say we're like, okay, cool. I like this preset. I think I actually want to even go back to our original camera, double click the cam, and let's go ahead and zoom this maybe a little bit closer to the edge so we're standing there. So let's go ahead and rewind, snap to the new position. So now we've got our shake going on. I love the way it's looking. I'm ready for this to go. But I don't want to lose it. I like this look. I'm going to use this more often. Or there's a bunch of different shots where this monster is stomping through the city. So I'm going to go ahead and jump to the main tab. And under our categories, we have presets, but we also have a save and delete button. So I'm going to go ahead and click save. And under save, I'm just going to go ahead and call this Stomp 1. And hit save, and boom, we've now got a user preset, Stomp 1. So you can, at any point, go back to that. I can go ahead and do some I'm feeling luckies, and you can see that it's going to keep jumping to different customs. So we got crazy big shake, nice calm one. Click again. Here we got some sort of earthquakey type one. But you're like, you know what? I want Stomp back again. I can just go back up to custom, go to the preset, say Stomp 1, and boom, we're right back to that preset we recorded. Now, on top of that, you see we've got this nice kind of regular stomp going. But you'd be like, you know what? I had a custom trigger and I recorded that inside the preset. I don't want that recorded. I want to get rid of that. So I can go ahead and delete that out and then save. And I'm going to save it as Stomp again. I'm just going to say Stomp, name it exactly the same, and say OK. And it's going to say, do you want to override it? And I'm going to say yes. And now I've recorded over that existing one. So this has become our new permanent one so that we didn't have those custom triggers recorded inside there. So the ability to save those, and if you wanted to, you can click delete and delete any of the user presets. You can't delete the defaults that we have in there, but yeah, you can go and record as many presets as you want and store them all up, and those are ready to rock whenever you need them. And the cool thing is if you copy your GorillaCam folder, let's say you upgrade from R18, you upgrade to R19. If you copy your GorillaCam from the folder of R18 to 19, those presets will move with it. But let's say that you have a coworker and they've also got GorillaCam, or they don't have GorillaCam and you just went and convinced them that they've got to get it. You want to send them your presets, your preset or presets. You can jump into the advanced tab and we have an export button here. So let me make sure I'm on Stomp 1. I can go over here and say, I want to export my current preset, and it's automatically going to pop open your plugin folder in the exports folder, and there's the user, and you can see Stomp 1 has been recorded, and you can take that and send it off to anybody else who has GorillaCam, and all they have to do is take this file and they will drop it into their import folder. And as soon as they go jump back into GorillaCam, I think even without restarting Cinema, without restarting GorillaCam, they can just click preset and that will trigger a refresh and they'll see any of the new ones. And if you had 10 presets in here, you could say export all, and all 10 would be in that folder ready to send off to someone else. So yeah, the ability to record these presets is super fun, and you don't realize how quickly you're like, oh, I want to go back to that one. So that is super helpful. Oh, also a tiny detail, jumping back a little bit, but when you're playing through just tinkering around and you're clicking I'm feeling lucky and you're like, nope, 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 and you're like, oh crap, I actually wanted that one, you can go ahead and hit undo and it will actually jump back to the previous one, so you actually wouldn't, if you go shooting past it, you didn't lose it, it's still there. So that's another a great little tidbit. And clicking through and finding a good I'm feeling luckies and being like, oh, I love it, but I want to maybe add a little position in there, and maybe these shakes are a little intense. And now I will go ahead and save that as Stomp 2. And now you've got a Stomp 2 as well, ready to rock, generated from the I'm feeling lucky button. So how's chat doing here?
Well, Dead Mouse's undoes what sorcery is this? Yeah, the undo I think was also like being able to undo the randomized seed has saved me at least, I don't know, at least 5 times, I
Yeah,
think.
random, random, random. Oh no, I liked it.
Yeah, like because you always think, well, maybe the next one will be. It's like gambling. Like the next one will be better. The next one will be better. No, actually, that one that I clicked 2 times ago is actually the best. So yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
So a couple questions. Someone up here, I can't remember where it was. Oh, it was Thunder Godding wanted to know how you might approach blending two presets together, going from one to another. I was mentioning that you could do that with a camera morph, or you could you could actually go in and animate all the settings. Is that sort of how you would approach it, Chris?
That is, yeah. I'm not going to do it right now, but just to talk through it really quick, you could record all the settings and translate from one to the other. But in addition, my mind is blown by this. But in addition to using, you can layer up a morph camera on top of a GorillaCam. You could make two GorillaCams and make at this point you have your reference cam, two different GorillaCams, and now you make a brand new fourth camera, make a morph tag on it, and morph between the two GorillaCams using the morph cam. And that would be, I would think, the most parametric way of doing it to really cleanly be able to transition between there. For the more technically minded out there, it's important to note that GorillaCam, the priority order triggers on 111, and we did that so that things like the morph cam, which I think don't trigger until expression level 100. This will work on top of a morph cam automatically, but keep in mind that the morph cam, you'd probably want to make sure that it's calculating in a larger number than the GorillaCams. But you could have a GorillaCam, you could have two different GorillaCams following two different morph cameras, and then make a third morph camera to morph between the now GorillaCammed morph cams. I'm not going to say that again.
Dude, I was like, this is some Inception level shit right there. Yeah, but that's kind of what I thought. I think that's what I actually typed into the chat too, is like you start to think about all the different ways you can use it, and it's pretty mind-blowing. But at the end of the day, it's just the purpose of GorillaCam is just to make your cameras look more human, more realistic, more engaging, more fun. You can use them as subtle as just creating just a slight bit of drift, or you can kind of go crazy with them and make them look like apocalyptic. But we're really excited. We're actually, I think I'm most excited to see what everybody else does with it, and because we've been kind of staring at the same demo scenes for a couple months now, and I'm kind of really anxious to see what other people do with it and how they use it, and if hopefully everybody that buys it will share their work with us so we can look at it and maybe we'll see it out in the wild. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been super cool. And I think we're at the wrapping up point. And if anybody stuck around this long, I think it's worth giving you the super secret tidbit here, a little workflow functionality that I think is pretty cool. Is just to save yourself a few clicks, nothing super crazy. But if you've got your GorillaCam, and we are linked currently to this camera, but you've got a different cam, you just placed a new camera over here, and you want this to become what the GorillaCam's on. If you click this brand new camera and you drop it on the GorillaCam tag, GorillaCam will automatically make that its target, and you can now see that I've jumped over to this position automatically. Whichever camera we drop onto there is going to become the one we're referencing. So you see this will actually zip on over to this other camera, and you can see the overshoot functioning there where the camera is trying to find its position. But you can actually transition by dragging and dropping there. But in addition to that, you can go ahead, and that's what happens if you drag a camera. But if you drag an object, so let me deselect this here. I'm going to go ahead and grab one of these spheres I just created and drop it on GorillaCam. And what's going to happen is it automatically assumes that that's a target that you want. So it is now automatically targeting that sphere. You'd be like, you know what? No, I didn't want that sphere. I wanted the sphere. You drop that on the GorillaCam, and it's automatically going to shift over to that one as a target. And
That's the first time I've seen that work.
Oh, really? You hadn't done
because we added that so late.
Yeah,
that
I
never played with it.
But then if you want to get fancier, you can go ahead and let me go and turn on. This is going to play back not as well on my machine as Chad's, but I'm going to go and make some depth of field here and grab all three of my cameras and just really crank this up. like, okay, cartoonishly blurry, that's fine, just for demonstration purposes. If I go and say, you know what, I'm targeting this camera, I want it also to be my focus, I can hold down the shift key as I drag the object onto GorillaCam, and it will also make that the focus object. And if you want to go extra crazy, if you grab, I want to make this sphere over here now the target. I'm going to go grab that one. And if I hold down shift and control as I drag it, it makes it both the target object and the focus object at the same time. And I guess as one, and the focus is so strong now that it can't quite get in focus because it's focusing in the midpoint of the sphere, not the front of it. But something that's pretty cool too is with all the smoothing and everything that's built in here, I could go ahead and grab, let's say, I'm going to rewind a little bit so it doesn't take too long, but let's say for the first 60 frames or so, we're targeting this object and focusing this object. I'm going to go ahead and record that, and let's go ahead and record that. And now let's jump forward a few frames, and I'm going to hold down shift and control, drop it back in, drop this other one in. You can see now it's shifted over to that. I'm going to record that and record that. So now that's all I did. I recorded those two things, and by default we've got some smoothing and some overshooting. So let's rewind and hit play, and you can see we're focused and targeting this sphere. And then at a certain point when those keyframes have been triggered, it's going to jump to our second target, and it's automatically got smoothing, it's automatically got overshoot. So just a fun way of jumping maybe from one null to another or from one target to another. And the smoothing is going to automatically clean that up for you. I'm going to go ahead and actually let's really crank up the smoothing on that and get rid of the targeting. In fact, let's go really high on that so we can see this smoothly transition as the pop happens. So right around frame 64, this is going to go and get to our second target. So yeah, really fun ways of layering the stuff up and just I mentioned this before when Chad and I were having a conversation, but the overall thing that I like about GorillaCam is it opens up. This isn't it's not my favorite setting, but
I think we've said that. We've both said my favorite thing about everything.
But that's my favorite thing about like buttons. But my favorite thing conceptually about GorillaCam is that it kind of opens up new design spaces, like new environments that you wouldn't really have time maybe to explore, or it's kind of so tedious that it's like, okay, I've got my, you're opening up a new scene, you go and you create a camera, you make it, you record the position, and you're like, okay, cool, the camera's here, that's where it is, it needs to go from A to B, I don't have time to do anything else. And GorillaCam makes it where, like, with just a few clicks, like, you make your new camera, you make a brand new GorillaCam, you're already from his POV, you go ahead and you hit play, and you're like, you know what, I'm feeling lucky, and you just keep on clicking this button, and boom, right there, made a GorillaCam, clicked the button one time, and now, like the slogan you kind of came up with, like we put life into the camera. Like, this isn't a dead camera anymore, and you don't realize how much this is adding. Like, just watching this slowly drift around a little bit, you don't realize how much that's adding until you jump back to the original camera and you just see it statically sitting there, and you're like, wow, with almost no effort, we can now explore the possibility of keeping the camera moving, keeping the camera alive. And it just makes it, I don't know, like I said, it's not that you couldn't have done this before. It's that it was so tedious to do that you didn't have time to explore that design space. And that's really exciting to me, is it just being able to make shots look better artistically, like by people making decisions about what they want. I clicked I'm feeling lucky one time and it looked good, but you could be like, I like that, but it's too much. Let's pull back the intensity. Or I like that, it looks good, but I want it to be really meandering, so I'm going to drop it to 50% of the speed. So just with a couple little changes of settings, even moving this slowly, that camera is alive now, where before it was just computer, it's just mechanical, it's dead. So that's at the end of the day what makes this really exciting.
But to answer any of the third-party renderer questions, which seem to be coming up quite a bit, it will work with any third-party renderer that supports a Cinema 4D camera, which I believe is all of them. We haven't found one yet that it doesn't work with.
Definitely a big three.
Because it's an animation plugin, it actually isn't doing anything with the renderer itself. It makes it really easy to be compatible with that stuff.
Let's see. I want to throw out maybe a couple important details. Baking, of course, is super important. Chad, we mentioned that a little bit when Chad was talking. But if you're going to be sending something off to a render farm, you don't know if it's installed over on the render farm, go ahead and bake it out. Like I said, we got the two different types of baking. If the camera's not dependent on anything, like this one, quick bake, like a second and it's baked, even if you got like 2,000 frames. Brute force bake is if there's camera is dependent on something. You're tracking a dynamic object that's zipping around the scene. It's dependent on the scene. Click that one, it'll do a brute force bake. It'll still probably be super fast. If you're doing team render, you could go and bake your camera. You don't even need the cameras installed on all the other machines. In both of those instances, I just want to throw out there that if you're sending out to a render farm or a team render, if you bake the camera and send it to it, it might throw up a warning saying, hey, you're missing a plugin. But that doesn't matter because it's keyframes. Like the keyframes are going to animate it. So it will go through regardless. So that is, I think that's super useful. It's so quick to bake this camera out. It's important to note that if you're going to be doing any in-camera motion blur, you want to bake it because it's not going to be able to do this kind of frame by frame interpreting. So you want to make sure that when you're going to go do any kind of motion blur, just do a quick bake before you render. That way you know you're going to get the nice blurs that you're expecting. Otherwise, it's not sure how to calculate those in-between subframes. Kind of like dynamics, because of the way that this camera is, in a lot of ways, pretty dynamic. It's calculating smoothing, it's calculating overshooting on the fly, which means it's dependent on the previous frame. So that's why you get a bake for the motion blur.
Yeah, that's definitely important. I tell everybody that is planning on using in-camera depth of field and motion blur to just play it safe, bake it out.
Yeah, and it's so quick to click it. It's simple to do it. But once again, always check a couple of render frames in just to be sure it's rendering. Never send a file off to a render farm at full quality. I know
James
that's a big.
Wooster is asking, hey, are the updates included? Well, we don't really have any updates yet. We're thinking about some stuff. Of course, updates that aren't like major feature upgrades will be included. But if we do anything major and it's a full upgrade, then it's like your typical paid upgrade situation. But point updates, point releases, bug fixes, that sort of thing are obviously going to be included.
These aren't promises because you never know the way things might change or what decisions we make, or if something's going to take too long, or something becomes a bigger project than we think it would be. But as a general rule, yeah, if like we've already got ideas for a point update, like like a 1.1 version, and right now somebody is coding some ideas that we had that we couldn't squeeze in for 1.0. So we're going to be trying to make this even better and better. But if one day we get to GorillaCam 2.0, maybe there's an upgrade fee. But point updates, I think those are just like, hey, check this out, this is cool.
Yep.
Thanks again, everybody, and we are going to be signing off. So bye everybody. You got to wave chat so I can click the buttons.
Okay.
Bye everybody.
Bye everybody.